From Eyewitness News, this is Newsmakers.
November 6, 2012 saw the second highest voter turnout in Rhode Island history. Combine that with dramatic changes to voting laws and polling locations, and problems emerged.
The line was just too long. People really got tired of waiting.
Some polling places were trouble spots, like this packed South Providence location, where people say they waited for up to 3 hours to vote. Others, wide open. Was it too much all at once? This week on Newsmakers, Executive Director of the Rhode Island Board of Elections, Robert Kando, and Executive Director of Good Government Group, Common Cause Rhode Island, John Marion.
Good morning. Welcome to Newsmakers. I'm Tim White. John Marion will join us on the second half of the program. But joining me right now on the panel, WPRI.com reporter Ted Nisi and political reporter for Rhode Island Public Radio, Ian Donis. Good morning, everyone.
Good morning, Tim.
Bob, thanks for joining us. Appreciate having you here. I know it's a busy place at the Board of Elections right now.
It is.
Right off the top, were you satisfied with how Election Day played out?
No, I think we had too many problems to say that we were satisfied. I think that a lot of the problems we had were the result of a lot of different things merging on the same day. One of the problems was the fact that it was a presidential election. Many of the cities and towns had multiple page ballots. Central Falls, for instance, had 4 pages. Providence had 3 pages. The number of people who were voting was one of the largest turnouts that we've ever had. We also had redistricting where everybody was assigned to a new district, so that that resulted in some confusion itself. Even though voters receive a notice of their new districts, many voters didn't pay as much attention to the notice as they might have. Mm-hmm. Some of the locations that we used were a little too small for the number of people assigned to it.
Was there a failure of planning then? I mean, we all know there was a bunch of changes thrown at the state all at the same time, as you point out, in a huge election year. Was it too much at once, and was there a failure of planning? I
think that the fact that the local boards have limited staffs, you know that the cities and towns are trying to cut back on staffing all around throughout their organizations. The Board of Canvassers in many of the cities have too few people working there to adequately address all the needs that they encountered this year.
As the General Assembly was considering some of these changes, did you raise any red flags and said, look, this might be too much all at once? We have that presidential election year. We have polling location changes, voter ID, mail ballots, shorter times at the, the list goes on, all jammed into one year. Did this keep you up at night going into November 6th? I
didn't envision that there would be any problems, at least of the magnitude that we had. Whenever we have changes, after redistricting, there's always a problem. Mm-hmm. I didn't fully anticipate the number of communities would have so many multiple page ballots.
Let's ask just briefly about one polling location. The top of the show, we showed those long lines at the South Province polling location. That was the Juanita Sanchez place. Specific there, people were waiting up to 3 hours to vote. Do you have a better sense of what happened at that location?
Well, I was there.
Yeah.
I was there. I saw Mayor Tavares there. And
describe it.
It was the polling place. The school itself has a very large cafeteria. For some reason, the city of Providence didn't put the polling place in the cafeteria. Instead, they posted it in the lobby. Mm. They were supposed to have some petitions up. The petitions were not there. The number of people that were assigned to that, I've got to give the poll workers there a lot of credit, because I think that they were understaffed, but that the number of poll workers that were there did, I thought, a wonderful job considering the number of people that were voting. And in fact, when I was there, it was towards the end of the evening, and things were moving along very well at that point. But I understand that during the middle of the day or early evening, things were just overwhelming to the poll workers.
Bob, the Board of Elections is staffed by people who are political appointees. Does that make the board too insulated from public accountability, since those people and people like yourself can't be voted out of office, unlike the Secretary of State?
I think it's just the opposite. I think that the Board of Elections commissioners, they're appointed by the governor. They receive advice and consent from the Senate, and they have a specific number of years for terms. They are also sworn in by the Rhode Island Supreme Court, and they take an oath of office of nonpartisanship. So that insulates the board from any political interference. So they cannot be, since they have specific terms, they can't be influenced by the different parties and candidates.
The board is one of very few state panels where the members are paid a stipend. The board members, the Board of Elections, get $7,000 a year. Why does that make sense in your view?
I think that, in fact, I think the stipend is, in fact, I think it should be even higher than what it is. Without the Board of Elections, without the commissioners there is no Board of Elections. They are in charge of the board, and they are, in fact, the group that essentially certifies and runs elections. So their responsibilities are enormous in my view, because without them we don't have any elections.
Do they get any other benefits, health insurance, anything to that?
There is no other benefit at all.
Okay.
Pawtucket had a hard-fought primary, the Tabone-San Bento races. You're well aware. It's still unclear to me if the board really counted all the votes there. Why were some votes counted by hand, some votes counted machine, 4 different outcomes, and you guys just stopped at one point?
Well, several years ago, the Rhode Island Supreme Court interpreted the recount statute, which talks about recounting precinct cast ballots, and ordered the Board of Elections to count not only the precinct cast ballots, but the mail ballots as well. Remember that the Board of Elections counted the mail ballots in the first place. So although the statute doesn't address mail ballots, we are now under an order from our Supreme Court to essentially count the mail ballots a second time, even though we've already counted them once. And we have thousands of mail ballots. So it's an enormous task to keep track of all those mail ballots. The recount that was done in the Tobon race with San Bento, really the precinct cast ballots were counted a single time by the Board of Elections. There was a 1-vote variance from election night, and when the board went to count the mail ballots, some of the mail ballots were not, 1 or 2 of the mail ballots were not counted in the first count.
We know the story of what happened that night, but my question is, we never got 2 counts that were the same. Why didn't you keep counting until you got the same thing twice at least?
Well, we did get the same count from the mail ballots from election night to the final count of the mail ballots on the Tobon race. So those 2 counts came out identical. The election night totals for the precinct cast ballots only had a variance of 1. So when you think of, so on the San Bento Tobon race, there was only a 1-vote variance from election night.
So are you satisfied with the way recounts are done in the state? Do you think can people have the full faith? There's still plenty of people who are concerned, the Tabone supporters, who don't think that was done fairly.
Well, I think that the people who in the Tobon race that think it wasn't done fairly don't appreciate just how much effort was put into it. I think that they were dissatisfied with the result, but I think that the recount was entirely fair. In fact, the recount supported the count on election night.
The wrong ballots were delivered to South Kingstown and West Warwick. I know people that went to the polling location before work. That was their window. They weren't able to vote.
Yes, that was
in a presidential year. What happened?
That was the vendor that delivered the ballots from the printer misidentified the ballots to the Board of Elections, but the Board of Elections should have caught that error and corrected it. The reason why the person didn't get it, didn't correct it, was an oversight by the individual that was doing that particular duty. In past years, we've had 2 people reviewing those ballots themselves, so that the Board of Elections would have 2 separate persons checking the ballots to ensure that they went to the correct place. Unfortunately, because of staff reductions, we don't have that additional person. In future elections, we plan to hire temporary workers to perform that duty.
The decision to hire you in 2005 was controversial. Roger Beechan, then chairman of the board, didn't support you. You didn't have previous experience in overseeing the administration of elections. What would you point to as your accomplishments in your time as executive director of the board?
I think as the executive, my time at the Board of Elections, pretty much we've been able to run elections, I think, better than we ever have. The mail ballot totals have been coming in earlier than they ever have. There's been more oversight, more checks and balances that are going into the system since I've been there. I think that Roger Beejan's opinion was based on the fact that his candidate wasn't chosen as opposed to me. I think that had more to do with it than my qualifications.
We have, Bob, new campaign finance rules that went into place earlier this year. Chris Blazajewski, the representative, the new whip, was strongly supportive of that. It appeared that there were mailers going out that did not conform with this. Where's the board's role in making sure that law is actually, people actually follow that in campaigning and independent expenditures?
The board has been reviewing all the expenditures that have been coming in. We have gotten some complaints about some individuals who have made independent expenditures. We are looking into those. The current law that was just recently passed is a bit complex if you've read it. And I think that some of it needs to be clarified in the future.
What would you ask the Assembly to do next year to make it more clear?
Well, we're going to present a new, we're going to suggest a new statute.
Entirely new?
I think that we'll use that there are some parts of it that just need to be replaced in its entirety. The statute has several areas that seem to be too complex for some persons to follow. And
like what?
Well, it talks about expenditures that are made or pieces that go out to individuals. For instance, I'm not sure if it's 5,000 or 500, but certain portions of the statute talk about reporting if you reach a certain number of people with respect to your flyers. And what happens is that under the statute, if you change a particular word on one flyer and send it out to just a number of people beneath that, that gives an independent expenditure a whole new light. So rather than go with, by numbering the persons receiving flyers or specific flyers, I think that it's time for it just to talk about a level of spending so that we can ensure that those independent expenditures are in fact reported.
Before we go to break here, I want to ask you about the ballot scanners. The ballot scanners we have didn't perform excellently on the election day. You have said that they are just too old, in your opinion, and that we need to buy new ballot scanners. What kind of a capital expense are we looking at here?
I think that that over an 8-year term, the expense will be somewhere in the amount of $10 million.
That's a lot of money.
Equipment costs a lot of money. And in fact, that would also include the service and maintenance.
Is this something that you were beating the drum for prior to 2012?
Oh, we've had that in our budget submissions for several years now.
And the Assembly hasn't passed the money?
Well, I'm not criticizing the Assembly here. I think that the machines were working adequately up until this past election. So they may have. The multiple-page ballots, I think, had the...
You're being kind, but you asked for a certain amount of money. It sounds like the Assembly hasn't put that money in the budget.
They do appropriate the money. I expect them to appropriate the money in the near future.
And how urgent is it, and how long does it take to get the new scanners up to speed? In other words, will we have new ones for 14?
Oh, I hope that we will. If I will be asking the General Assembly in the next budget to put in funds for purchase in the next fiscal year. That way we'll have the machines in use for 1 year prior to the next general election. It's always best to learn how to use the new machines in the off year and then put that into practice for the general election.
But Bob, we would stick with paper ballots?
Oh yes, everybody loves paper ballots. I think that, in fact, nationwide, those communities and states that are not using paper ballots are trying to move their current systems into paper ballot systems.
Is that your bumper sticker? Everybody loves paper ballot. Robert Kando, Executive Director of the Rhode Island Board of Elections. Thank you for joining us on the program. The postmortem on Election Day continues. When we come back, Executive Director of Common Cause Rhode Island, John Marion. Stay with us. You're watching Newsmakers. Welcome back to Newsmakers. I'm Tim White. I am joined by Ted Nesi and Ian Donis, and our guest for the second half is the Executive Director of Common Cause Rhode Island, John Marion. John, welcome back to the program.
Thank you very much, Tim.
On Election Day, you tweeted, I quote, "Administrative incompetence is disenfranchising voters in Rhode Island today." Get beyond the 140 characters on that statement.
Well, you know, I was referring particularly to where the wrong ballots were delivered in a couple of municipalities at the beginning of the day, and there were reports of people leaving the polls. And from my experience, I was actually working a poll that day, conducting a survey. I wasn't at one of those problem polls, but I saw people who had problems and said, "This is my only window today to vote. I have to go to work. I'm not going to get to vote today." And I would imagine at those locations where they got the wrong ballots, and it took, as I've heard, up to a couple of hours to get the right ballots, there were many people who were disenfranchised. Once, you know, you have a period before the election to request like an emergency absentee ballot, but once Election Day comes, if you can't get to your polling place, you can't vote.
What would you give Rhode Island as a letter grade for how it performed on Election Day?
You know, in the vast majority of places, I think things went well. But the problem with elections is you need to be as close to perfect as possible, because if one person is denied the right to vote, that's not a good thing. And in last Election Day, more than in recent elections, quite a few people, I think, were denied the right to vote by administrative errors. You know, see?
Okay. Go ahead,
you
Ted.
heard Bob Kando in the first half of the show. He did take some responsibility on the board of elections, said some things he wants to change. What's your reaction to what you just heard him say about how things went?
Yeah, no, it's always great to see public officials take accountability. I would have liked to have heard, you know, he talked about that somebody checked the ballots as they were supposed to be distributed. You know, who was that? What's going to happen to them? That's a pretty big flub. You know, I'm glad he took responsibility for the board's role in what went wrong. There's some blame to go around with local boards of canvassers, seem to have some problems. I know Providence shifted some polling locations between the primary and the general that caused some confusion in Providence. You know, the General Assembly deserves the lion's share of blame here for changing too many laws in a presidential election year. That created sort of this perfect storm.
You've been beating the drum, on new machines. Do you think that's something that can happen, and is that something that should have happened already?
Yeah, I mean, we absolutely need new machines. We've known for a while that ours are a couple of cycles old. After the 2000 debacle, the federal government started pushing money out for new voting machines. Rhode Island actually used it to sort of plug the deficit. We didn't buy new machines in the early 2000s with that money. Which I think is a mark against the Carcieri administration and the General Assembly of a decade ago. Because of that, all these machine manufacturers sped up their life cycles for these machines because they were selling more, and ours quickly got outdated. So we definitely need new machines.
John, you mentioned the General Assembly a little earlier, and we see how the cause of having a real two-party system in Rhode Island took another setback in last week's election. The number of Republicans in the General Assembly will go down in January from 18 to 11. One thing we hear is it's really tough to get people to run for office, particularly as Republicans. What do you think can be done about that?
You know, I think there are several things, and we're looking at some of them. There are issues surrounding, you know, from the moment you decide you might want to run for office, and when the filing period is, and how the filing period for candidates is arranged. And there have been a lot of complaints about incumbents handing off to people to replace them when they retire, and we're looking at that. There are issues around what advantages incumbents have, everything from you know, legislative grants to the master lever.
Cars.
cars, thousands, tens of thousands of people use the master lever, and that helps those down ballot candidates in the General Assembly. And that might be something that's something we've opposed and needs to be worked on.
What message do you think the General Assembly and the ruling Democrats will take from their big success at the ballot box last week? Do you think they'll be more focused on Rhode Island's problems, or do you think it'll result in more complacency?
It's not. They're not a monolith, right? I think Gordon Fox had a spirited challenge, the most spirited challenge he's had in a long time, and I think that's going to affect him to some degree as a leader because of that. And I think he's already made some promises on marriage equality and other issues to bring them forward. Voter ID, actually, he's talked about changes because he heard as he knocked on doors. Goes to show you what happens when you have a two-party system, even though his opposition was an independent. In the Senate, I don't think we're going to see as many changes because there weren't those challenges to the leadership.
You had referenced that you were at a polling location conducting a survey. You were doing this with NYU, I believe. It was a voter survey on Election Day. What was it all about, and do you have results from it yet? No
results yet, but we worked with the Brennan Center, which is a think tank at NYU Law School that works on voting rights issues. We were one of 7 states that conducted a survey. We had about 80 volunteers at 15 polling places around the state in 7 communities, asking a 22-question survey about the voter experience. We weren't asking about who you voted for. We were asking about, how long you waited in line and where you asked for an ID and those sorts of things. Did you come to the right polling place? Did you receive a postcard in the mail? We got about 350 responses, which I think is pretty good. In English and in Spanish. We happened to have a volunteer at Juanita Sanchez, just was one of the places we had chosen. And so I've shipped those to New York, where the law school is going to look at those. What did you get from your experience at the polling location you were in? So I was away on the far west side of Providence. I was standing outside with a clipboard. People, and I heard this from a lot of our volunteers.
They thought you worked there.
They thought I was some sort of authority figure, and they asked me questions. And I saw numerous people who went inside, were told they weren't registered or weren't registered there, and were confused at what the implications of that were. You can go in Providence to the Dunkin' Donuts Center and cast a ballot if you're not registered for president, and that's a result of the 2002 Help America Vote Act. People don't understand that. That's not been widely advertised. And so people were confused by, why are they telling me to go downtown and vote? I actually saw a veteran who came to vote, was told he wasn't registered there, go downtown, came back because he was told to downtown that he couldn't vote there. He was registered. He persisted, but this took him over an hour. It was discouraging to see some of the problems. It was really encouraging to see people's perseverance. Holy cow, people want to vote.
Looking ahead to 2014, we're taping this on Friday. In this morning's Providence Journal, Terry Donnellan, who was Governor Sondland's former press secretary, called for voters to approve a constitutional convention at the state level on the 2014 ballot. First, do you agree with him that we should have one?
Yeah, so every 10 years, per our Constitution, it has to be on the ballot if they don't take it up sooner. In 2014, it comes up. Common Cause, in the last 2 cycles, in 94 and 2004, has opposed the Constitutional Convention for various reasons. Last time, one of the reasons was separation of powers. Our signature issue was also on the ballot that year, and we didn't want to confuse things. We don't have a position yet. I have a governing board of about 25 individuals, citizens of Rhode Island, who are going to take this up in the next year.
Where's the timeline for them to decide if they think there should be one?
We don't have a timeline per se. I think sometime in the next year we will.
Why are General Assembly leaders so antsy about the possibility of a constitutional convention? People might forget because we haven't had one in almost 30 years.
It's basically you're taking our basic document, deciding the most fundamental issues about how we govern ourselves, and opening it right up. For those who don't know, there would be a special election to elect 75 delegates, one from each House district, and they would get to put on the ballot as many questions as they'd like. So I think in '86, there might have been 16 questions on the ballot, most of which were defeated. but some of which succeeded, like creation of an ethics commission. Yes.
Speaking of the ethics commission, that's a cause very near and dear to the heart of your organization. The Senate remains a roadblock to restoring legislative oversight for the ethics commission. What's the next step on this? Do you have any hope that progress can be made?
You know, I will continue in any way we can to sort of bring pressure on them to put this on the ballot in 2014, because the legislature has to pass it and then it has to be put on the ballot to change the Constitution. You know, all we can do is continue to beat the drum as loud as we can.
Do you still think it's necessary?
Oh yeah, absolutely. And I think the last session showed some of the questions that arose around the behavior of certain legislators and whether or not they had a conflict of interest. And that's what the Ethics Commission is here to do, is decide that.
All right, with less than 20 seconds, again, I want to get your reaction to Senate President Teresa Paiva-Weed using a state vehicle to go to a political fundraiser.
Yeah, so I commented in your story. You know, I was surprised. I didn't know they had cars at their disposal. Certainly, political parties are private organizations. State resources shouldn't be used to support participation in political activities like that. Executive Director of Common Cause Rhode Island, John Marion, thank you for joining us this week on the program. If you missed Bob Kando on the first half, you can catch it online, WPRI.com. For Ian Donis, Ted Nisi, I'm Tim White. We'll see you next week on Newsmakers.